So we're really lucky today to have Chris Morrison with us. Chris is maven in the area of marketing and sales in the early stage and has come up with some very novel approaches, very innovative approaches to doing customer development and getting to know your customer, which is everything in entrepreneurship. So Chris, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Ted.
Chris, how did you get here? You know, you've had a great career and you've been involved with many high growth ventures. And you've been doing your own practice for more than 10 years, so in 15 years?
It's pushing 20 years now. It was like 2004-ish.
Yeah.
So it's pushing, I can't believe it's been that long.
That's
like good and scary all at the same time.
Well, tell me a little bit about your background and what kind of roles you've had in the past.
So, so I'm trained as an engineer, never ever practiced, but it served me extremely well in working in the startup environment because it's all problem solving, and that's what I got trained in college. How to take complex problems, figure out the right patterns in and how to solve the problem. So that's what I trained in. But I started my career running large medical practices and surgery centers. But early on, I knew I wanted to go from like the support team to the lead team. So I got into sales. So I got into medical sales, and then as for many of us, a bit of a happenstance, my second sales job was with a startup company.
Oh, okay. The rest is history.
Yeah, rocky. A rocky road.
You're on the
all
roller
over
coaster.
the place. Exactly, as you would imagine with working with startups.
Sure.
But also figuring out where my career was going to be. So I worked for some big companies. I never really stuck well in working in large companies. Mm-hmm. So I kind of gravitated to the startups early on, and I fell in love, and I didn't know this at the time, but it matches my skill set and my personality, but I like the chaos of a startup, and the piece that I love about that is, as a salesperson, it's just not executing a model that's already there. It's kind of uses the creative juices, the creative side of having to figure out what that model is. And I didn't figure that out for 15 or 20 years, and that's what had me gravitate towards it.
As a matter of fact, your magnum opus is one of your key insights is agile market entry.
Yes.
And I found that to be fascinating because I think many of the startup entrepreneurs don't really have a sense of how they curate information about the customer preferences, customer orientation, behavior, life cycle. How do they buy? How do you sell? And you wrapped it all together in a nice method. Would you mind unpacking it for us? What is agile market entry?
So I'll unpack it in two ways. I think one is how did I just kind of get there to create it, and that started with where we started with me gravitating to startups, and then over time going back to startups and do it over and over again. You could kind of say I'm a glutton for punishment because I like that stage, which statistically, if you look at data, it's the hardest stage. And that stage from right before launching to going to launch and getting to scale is the valley of death for all companies.
It's an acid test.
It's an acid test, and it is the hardest stage for any company in group. So it's kind of a glutton for punishment, but I found myself kept coming back and back to that.
You love it.
For me, whenever I would get into companies, this is like a personality flaw, right? I would get in companies. Or a power. Once I figured it out, it became a power, right? But the personality flaw was once it would get to, I would kind of start figuring out what the sales model was. I would start getting bored.
Okay.
So I would
just turn the crank. You're like, I'm on to the next thing.
I was on to the next thing. If it was inside the same company, I'd go start creating something else. But that's not what my sales manager wanted. He wanted me to just crank the wheel.
Of course.
So
got you.
But that was my personality. But I always gravitated back to that disruptive space, that period of time.
You call it chaos, but it's kind of like adaptation in a lot of ways because you're getting a lot of data from a lot of different places, and then it's making some order around it, building some process around it, getting it going, and then at that point, other people can turn the crank.
Yes.
You're making it so that many people can sell.
Yes.
But you had to figure it all out. It's like the ideal problem. So using your engineering training, it's complexity.
It's complexity.
Yeah.
And the difference between the engineering training and it is you're dealing with human nature instead of the physical world. Okay. The physical world, you have laws, you actually follow the laws. Human nature, it's a lot grayer than that, right?
Yeah.
So it's I used to say what I do is not rocket science. Now I say it's not rocket science, it's actually harder because you're dealing in the gray.
No question. It's easy to do mechanics. It's easy to do, well, it's not easy, but
It's not
I
easy.
say, but they're fixed principles.
They're fixed principles.
Physics,
Right.
Organics, what we're dealing with are things we know, but business, oh my gosh, it's human a process, and humans are complicated.
Humans are complicated, and you layer on top of that, at the beginning when you're doing something disruptive like that, you never have all the data you need to make statistically relevant decisions. So you have to find patterns, you have to learn, you have to figure out which of those patterns have meaning, which of them don't, and then you have to start building upon those patterns to build the model. And that's challenging, and you have to trust yourself. And for me, I've just done it for so long, there is some learning over time that points you in the right direction, and you have to figure out, and that kind of gets back to how Agile Market Entry came about. I literally sat down and realized, this is probably 10 years ago, that the way I sold was different than most salespeople sell.
Okay.
And it's because of that space I operated in, but I didn't know at the time. And I said, listen, there's got to be a framework for navigating through this. And I went and looked for it. It wasn't out there for what I did.
No kidding. Was it more asking questions and putting yourself out there, trying theories, almost hypotheses, to see if things will happen? Or tell us a little bit about how you sell.
So that's the way it always started. Yeah, that's the way it started. I would put myself in these situations. I would kind of trust myself. But what ended up happening when it got to the point when I got to the Agile Market Entry, I started going back and looking at the patterns I had learned over the years of doing this over and over again, by just kind of trial and error at that stage. But when I started,
there really was a pattern.
there was real patterns.
Yeah.
There's real patterns.
So Pete Diamandis has the concept of flow, where you're taking complexity and moving it to flow.
Yeah.
I've seen that same thing again and again. Entrepreneurs, it's pure entrepreneurship, taking what is a complex phenomena and getting it to something that you're starting to see behavior, characteristics,
Yep.
a pattern.
Yep.
And not everyone can see it.
Well, if you think about it, to be able to do that, at least in the space I'm doing it, I used to call it right brain, left brain thinking.
Yeah.
But it's actually, and you need both, because a salesperson, the more accurate term I learned is divergent, convergent thinking, right? That's kind of the scientific term, right brain, left brain. I've learned that's not real, but the divergent, convergent thinking is. And a traditional salesperson is convergent thinking, because they're the ones that are going to execute rationally, repeatedly, they're going to do the same thing. But to go through this early stage, you have to have that, because you have to have that skill set to go out and sell and get those first customers. But you also have to have the divergent thinking, which is that creative, that being able to see the big picture. Operating at 20,000 feet, but then dropping down to 2 feet and then back up again.
So trying to understand what the customer's real need is and what's behind the scenes. So look at the big picture, put yourself in the customer's perspective, but then zoom down to am I going to make a decision?
Yeah, that's it. So that's part of it. So the first part of it is, I just got to go get some sales. Because without sales, I don't have data to start working with. So, and that's where you kind of that drop down. You just got to figure out. And early on, and we were talking a little bit before this, you got to do some block and tackle work. Just get some customers. And most of that is throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing what sticks, right? Being opportunistic, working your network. But what you're doing at that stage, and you mentioned earlier, is you're trying to get enough data to start seeing patterns.
Got you.
And that's where the divergent thinking starts working, where you have to start pulling the signal out of the noise. What's relevant, what's not relevant, what's important, what stage am I at developing my business model, what are the critical things to answer, and that's where the convergent thing. So you have to be able to do both. And we've been all over the place in this conversation, but that's what led me to Agile Market Entry, is this need to have I was both a convergent and divergent thinker. You are too.
Yes.
You regulate it. But, well, to do what we do, we do. Most people are not. Most people either
One or the other. Right.
And then there's these people, and the best way to find them is entrepreneurs.
You know, it occurs to me, divergent thinking, you actually are informing the business model and the product at the same time. Because you're getting information that's saying, oh, wait a minute, they don't care about this feature.
Okay.
They don't care that it's green.
Yes.
They don't care that it has a blue color. It has something to do with this and its usability or functionality or something that's higher value add.
This thinking that you and I are talking about, it doesn't, to me it's sales, because that's what I've done.
Yeah.
But this is, what we're talking about is a function. This early market development sits in the middle of everything, should literally be driving everything.
Gotcha.
So the sales effort, and I don't like to call it sales because traditional sales is sales at scale.
Right.
Which is
repeated event.
Repeated event.
Process, well-proven
Right.
protocol.
That's why I kind of call it agile. That's why I call it market entry, because I call it, or market development. It's different than sales, but sales should be leading product development at this stage.
Of course.
This market entry, it should precede any product development at all. It should be leading finance. It should be leading. It has to lead marketing. Marketing message doesn't come from marketing on down.
No.
It comes from those early customers on up.
And the customer engagement through sales. And it comes from the old days when we used to sell things before we had them.
Yes,
And we
yes.
go back to tell the programmers, we need to build this because I just promised it. They're like, what? What have you done? But in a lot of ways, what you're trying to do is find what the customer wants.
That's all you're finding. Well, you're trying to find two things. One is that unmet need that the customer's trying to solve and wants today.
Uh-huh.
Because if you have to teach them that they need something, that's like the death. When I hear an entrepreneur say, well, we have to educate the marketplace.
And I forget it.
It's not going to happen.
It never happens.
It never happens. And you can't. And for a startup company, you don't have the bandwidth,
No.
capital-wise, time-wise, to be able to do that. So you have to first of all find that need that the market already is trying to solve or wants to solve. But then you have to find out whether they're willing to pay to solve it too. Those are the two key things you're trying to. So at the end of the day,
Is there a need and are they willing to pay for it?
are they willing to pay
Yeah.
for it? That's it. That's all you're trying to figure out early on.
Got you.
And then the whole sales process, and so that's your market entry point, right?
Yeah.
Who's the customer? What's their problem? Are they willing to pay?
And your application of use Agile. Agile is now adopted across the board
Yes.
in design around entrepreneurship, building out product and so forth. But you brought them into marketing and sales because you described the environment as chaotic, but what you're trying to do is get to patterns
Yes.
and then you can start to order.
Yes.
Is that right? So Agile is really a function of the environment of the early stage.
And I think there's two definitions floating around out there around Agile with selling.
Mm-hmm.
One is bringing Agile methodologies into sales, Scrum, all that. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
What we're talking about is like
Having agility.
the pure definition of Agile.
Yeah.
Right. Like
I
being
can dance.
Agile, having the dance, knowing that, and this is critical to the thinking of sales at scale and at growth stage versus this early stage, execution versus discovery. That is the biggest, if you get down to the fundamentals of what's different about selling when you're selling a disruptive product at launch versus anything at scale. Scale is an execution-based process.
Right.
Because you have a proven model and you're cranking the wheel, so you're scaling up in that early stage, it's a pure discovery
It's about
process.
traction. It's really about getting traction. It's
Yes.
finding something you can repeat
Yes.
until you get it right.
So it's about finding traction, then reverse engineering that
Right.
into the patterns that can give. So
Got you.
you got to start. You got to get some early traction. Then you got to say, okay, what are the patterns? Who's my customer? What's the problem? And then from that, you figure out what your entry point is. Then you figure out what your messaging is. That's what then gets handed on to marketing. Start building the lead generation. Once you build the lead generation, now you have a chance to start figuring out your sales process. Okay, that's our traditional sales process, those steps. Then, this is where it diverge from traditional sales too. You have to do the adoption process as well. Because this is the worst thing a company can do with a product launch is get the front end working and get these happy buyers, but because they don't have the adoption process figured out, turn those happy buyers into dissatisfied customers.
Because they didn't deliver.
Because they didn't deliver, or they didn't meet the expectation, or they couldn't get them up and trained. Whatever, there's all There's a whole bunch of things.
So it's really about fulfilling and keeping them satisfied through this sequence.
Well, that's what creates your brand engine, right?
Yeah.
That's where we creates the recurring revenue, but it also what creates your brand engine. It's what, and you and I know this from doing this for so long. What's your greatest marketing tool? It's referrals and references.
Of course.
By far, there's nothing that comes close to it.
Right.
Well, if you launch a product and you got the front part figured out, and out of those the rest will flow.
Mm-hmm.
Talk the flow. If it doesn't, if out of those first 10 customers, 8 of them are unhappy, it creates churn within the company, it creates churn within the market, and you've actually dug your hole deeper because now your brand is, in the marketplace, is negative.
Got you.
So
if we go back to an example, I'm just going to lay out a really simple example, but let's say the test that you laid out, 1, the customer wants it. 2, they're willing to pay for it. But what do you do in the scenario when the customer is not willing to pay the margin you want? So they're willing to pay for it, but they're not willing to pay as much as you'd like them to pay.
Right.
What do? Do you adapt the product? Do you adapt the process? Do you do both?
Right. So there's yes and yes, right? The answer, it depends. But I think the first place I go with that is I go narrow. Mm-hmm. Because a couple things going on. When you launch a product, your costs are the highest they're ever going to be.
Right.
And over time,
you're the most inefficient.
You're the most inefficient across the board on building the product, delivering the product, servicing the product, selling the product. Everything is. So your costs are the highest right now.
Efficiency is not the goal.
No.
You're throwing shit against the wall.
No, but what will happen is your margin will go up over time.
Yeah.
So what I try to do early on, and this is true. This is kind of we haven't followed this, but this is a tenet of launching disruptive products. You want to go very narrow early.
Okay.
And the reason you want to go narrow early is a couple of reasons. One is you want to find that problem in the marketplace that has the highest pain.
Got you. So if it's not this problem, it's another problem.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking you're firing customers. So it could be that you're not my customer.
So the early sales process is not a qualifying process, it's a disqualifying process.
Okay, you find out who doesn't want it.
You want to identify, and if you look at the Rogers adoption curve, right? Those innovators and early adopters, those are the only people that will buy a disruptive product out of the gate.
Gotcha.
The early majority won't buy it until they have evidence and validation of what you're saying to them. So it has to have market validation already. So you gotta remember, that's only 14% of the marketplace. So you're already you want to get that 86% that's early majority out of your pipeline as quickly as fastly as possible. You just want to try to sell. So part of it is, yes, you're disqualifying. So the early sales, I reverse sell clients. When I get someone interested, I try to start talking out of it. Because I want to see if those early buyers are going to start pulling me to them. And they'll say something, no.
I want that.
Exactly, and we need it.
Yeah,
so
I need it tomorrow.
Exactly.
You're looking for urgency.
I'm looking for urgency.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought about trying to convince them not to do it.
I'm looking for that pull. So once you get them interested, once they kind of like that early qualifying, you're looking for, I got my guy, now I'm going to go. No, I don't jump in the sales process, I then test.
Yeah.
I pull away.
A/B testing.
I pull away and I see if they pull me to me, because that helps me identify whether they're an innovator or only adopter, or if they're going to get my pipeline, just gunk it up and fill it up and just churn in my pipeline, because that's what anybody in the early majority will do with the disruptive technology out of the gate. So I want to get those out as quickly as possible, because I just want to close. And you don't want to oversell in the beginning. You want to make sure. Here's the other problem you have, and this is about those margins going down. This is why you want to go narrow early. Is you sell someone, their life is going to get worse before it gets better. You sell them, when we pitch, we sell them on the promise of a better future, right?
Right.
But as soon as they say they're going to buy, now they've got to go through a buying process, then you have to do install, engage, then they got to go through the training process. And so if you look at the energy scale, this is status quo. The amount of energy to operate as soon as they buy goes up. So it takes more of their energy. And eventually they get down to the promised land where
this works.
Where it works.
Yeah,
but the other thing is that how much energy it takes for both you and the customer, it's the greatest with your first customers, because you're learning together.
Yeah, we talk about like friction. You know, when there's friction, you know, you do want to take friction out of the process. It's impossible when people are adopting a new thing. You got to learn, you got to train, you got to be able to communicate.
And you're learning about your product along with your customer, so you don't even know everything. You don't know how it's going to adopt. You don't know how long it's going to take to train. You don't know if it's going to take, you know, for me, I do a lot of stuff in medical. You don't know if it's going to take 5 surgeries for them to become competent and comfortable with it, or it's going to, or 5,000. You don't know.
You have no idea.
You have no.
You know, it's interesting. By going narrow, I worry about one function, and that is that you become a niche product. So, you know, when you look at the distribution, you're killing that 14% of early adopters. And I get that you're trying to get them as evangelical. You're trying to get them as your group.
Yes.
How do you spread them now, just using Jeff Moore's work, into that majority profile?
So if you use agile market entry, you know that going in. So you know you have to cross the chasm already. So from out of the gate, you're building that evidence with those early customers. Okay. So, you know, a lot of times, I mean, I was just doing a report for a customer earlier today. You know, early customers always ask for a break, right? They always want a discount. So plan for that going in. Yeah. And know what you're going to ask of them in return for that break. Ask them for references. Ask them to help write white papers, you know, so you testimonials, all that stuff.
Maybe even be referrals.
So you know you've got to get that. So start planning for that from the get-go. So first of all, get them in. Get them to adopt your product, get to the promised land so they're happy, so you want to turn a happy buyer into a highly satisfied customer out of the gate, and then get them as part of your marketing team.
There you go. It's like creating a big network.
It's like creating a big network and creating a big momentum and creating your market brand for a startup company out of the gate is your early customers.
So most salespeople don't even, well, you know, I shouldn't say this, but a lot of salespeople kind of dismiss the brand. I love the fact that you introduce the brand in that early process, because what you're doing is communicating what you stand for.
Oh yeah.
So basically, what are your values? What are you accomplishing? What do you believe in? Now you're delivering to those goals.
Yes.
And you're always consistent.
The other thing, and that's an interesting topic, and this is kind of going off probably but for a startup company, IP is important to protect your position. But I'll tell you, if you have really, really happy customers and you help them solve really critical problems, those are the most loyal. Those customers are unbelievably
it's a
loyal.
Debt they have to you.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, yeah, because you actually been in the trenches together with them.
Yeah.
Solving the problems that they've been dealing with for a long time.
Got it.
Those customers you hear the first follower idea, it's a myth. If a startup company that's doing disruptive work comes out of the gate and does the job right, there's no room for fast followers. There's only room for fast followers for people that don't do this well and don't create that positive brand in the market.
So you're basically, it's a conversion process. You're converting different profiles by just showing how this is working.
So that's how you expand, right? So the first expansion is into the early majority. So you're building that, you're building that right from out of the gate. But here's the other thing. When you go, the key early on is 2 things. One is data, right?
Yeah.
It's not revenue. Most companies focus on revenue as a goal. It's not.
Yeah.
It's your understanding and your market intelligence, your market knowledge is the most important thing. And that's what you get from your early customers. So I will always trade off revenue dollars for understanding my marketplace early on because it's so much more valuable.
Interesting. So you could look at this as almost like an investment. So your first customers, you are kind of giving up on your profitability or margin goals with the exchange that you're learning the market and getting to another customer set.
Well, that's the other conversation. So let's step back and answer the earlier question. So if you narrow and get those early customers that have the highest pain, they're also the ones that are willing to pay the most for that, to solve that pain. So you can keep your margins up early.
Gotcha.
And as time goes on, your margins will drop down. And every market does
that. But that's the saturation question.
But that's a saturation question.
You just keep on winning on that category of the highest need.
Yep. So here's the other thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Once you're in the market, so this is why you want to go narrow, because you want to penetrate the market fast. When you go narrow and you increase the pain, You target those early adopters. That's the fastest, the most frictionless way to enter markets. It's also, when you go narrow, you can get scalability quickly.
Right.
So now you have
the same scenario.
It's the same thing. You have a portion of your market you now can scale. So now you can bring in, you have someone like me comes in and gets that early market going, figures it out. Now you hand it over to a professional sales team and a professional sales team to manage that market. Now, what I have that no one else in the world has, when I'm in that role, I know more about that market than anybody in the world does. If you're doing something truly disruptive.
Yeah.
And what I have by being...
It's more than secret sauce. It's like a unique selling proposition, or actually it's something that's it's distinct.
Well, no one else has it.
No one has your USP.
It's exactly. It's my secret power.
Yeah.
It's my superpower. But also what it gives me is, I call them tangential markets. It shows, it tells you where to go next. The market, if you're paying attention, and this is how this is how a convergent, divergent thinker thinks, this is how agility works. You start looking, and this is what got me fired in other jobs. I started looking for the next thing.
Yeah.
And if I'm paying attention to the market, now I'm on the inside, I'm the most knowledgeable in that marketplace, I'll figure. You probably know a local company called Express Analysis.
Sure, yeah.
So this is why I did Express Analysis. We went in and we were opportunistic. We got into small biotech companies, academic labs and small government labs that didn't have access to core facilities. That's where we started. But once I was in and kind of had figured that piece out, I was exposed to, I started trying to sell into big pharma, and I realized I couldn't sell on the discovery side, which is what only place we were selling into at the time. But what I saw was, when I started attending and started talking with those folks, because I knew my piece of the market better than anybody else, there was an opportunity because big genomics was coming into pharmaceuticals, and it was going to get to the FDA at some point. It was going to get to the clinical side.
So that was a bet.
It wasn't even a bet. If you were there at the time, you knew it was coming. What you don't know is you don't know what the timing is.
Right.
But that's always the truth of any market, right?
It's true in disruption.
It's true. You can see AI. We know it's coming.
Yeah.
We don't, how and when it's going to hit, we don't know.
It's true.
Right? Back then, we knew that with genomes. And, this was back in 2002, 2003. We thought it was going to happen in 5 years. Well, now we're 20 years later, we're starting to finally see some of it happen. But what I saw was there was an opportunity. There was FDA and pharma. We were this tiny little company that was managing this data. We were sending millions of data bits of data to our customers on a weekly basis. FDA's biggest fear was they didn't know how they were going to manage the increase in the data load with genomics over what they were doing today. And I was at a meeting in a conference out in Denver, and I've been pitching some of these ideas, just incubating them internally in my company.
Trying to see patterns. Sharing them with bouncing off people in my group, testing how I spoke about it. So I was starting to practice it because no one had done this stuff. Super cutting edge stuff.
I figured I'm talking about it internally. That'll help me conceptualize it, think about it, formulate it, let it percolate. Also prepare me to start talking about it when I got a topic. We were at the meeting, and the head guy at FDA was at that meeting, was talking to our head of our lab, and she goes, you need to talk with someone from Frederico Goodsite, something like that.
That's pretty impressive. You remember names.
Well, this was a fun event. He was from Shearing Cloud. We sat down that night, and Frank goes to me, he goes, you can do that? It's in the transfer of data? He goes, and we started talking about what he was concerned about. I said, well, why don't we set up a mock electronic submission with the FDA, and we'll start practicing it with you. We can do that.
Oh man! So now that's like totally unique scenario. So it's almost a monopolistic kind of thing. Now you're setting it up with a major player with the FDA.
Yes.
So that gives you the perfect hedge.
It gave me the perfect edge. And here's the really funny thing about that story. FDA did a press release on that submission. We didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, we're innovative. FDA innovative.
But they named us in it.
Yeah, that's That's great.
So I was, within 6 months, I was in every head of toxicogenomics and pharmacogenomics of all the major pharma companies. Now, it took us a while to get into that market.
Boy, you did find that entry point.
But we found the entry point.
And started just dominoes falling.
Yes.
So you've been selling on the B2B level and the B2C level. How does it vary? How do you talk to channels relative, well, I don't even know if I want to call them channels, but B2B customers relative to end consumers?
So I really don't do the B2C stuff.
Yeah.
So all my stuff's B2B.
But you use a lot of the same techniques, don't you?
So yes and no.
Okay.
So most of the B2C stuff now, most of the sales is done on the internet.
Yeah.
It's
through
internet.
the traction, ultimately what you're getting by way of results.
Exactly. And that world is that's way ahead of us B2B folks.
Okay.
Because they've innovated, they've started doing agile stuff.
Sure.
And they can because of the
data.
Because they have the tools and the data.
Right.
Now you can I've been doing it for 40 years on the B2B side.
Yeah.
And you have enough data.
What's funny is most startups are B2B. So the B2C players on the startup side are usually very well financially backed, VC driven deals.
Yep.
And they're unique.
Yep.
They're very rare. Tell me a little bit more on the B2B side. So how has that evolved? How do you get better data on the B2B side? Or do you have to develop your own data just like the old days?
You still have to do it like the old days. So here's the big issue. If we're in execution mode, and this is what happens for most companies. So there's a mindset of how we do selling, and it's how we've all been trained. I've never been traditionally trained, which is probably one of the greatest things that happened to me in the sales arena because I never got traditional training. But we're all trained to operate in the execution mode, which is taking a proven model and executing it over and over again. Every VP of sales, that's what they come in, they build teams to do that. So, and this is, your question was around the data that we have to get. I'm just kind of lost track of my thinking. I'm trying to retract myself here. So the data that we have to get, so how do we do it? If we know from the get-go we're in the discovery mode, and we know and we operate that the data is the critical thing, not the revenue, which actually prevents us from doing the discovery work we need to do. If we know that, the data is there to figure this stuff out pretty efficiently, especially compared to the traditional way we do it. And if the traditional way we do it, if we're focusing on revenue and we're not going through the learning process, what ends up happening is we get up to a little start and then it flags out and then it does this.
Right.
And we extend our period to the inflection point of getting to the growth stage of the curve. So we actually extend it. So if we know at this early stage when we're doing this, that we're trying to figure out what the patterns in the data that get us to the repeatable sales process, which gets us to the growth stage of the revenue curve. If we know that, two things happen. If we pay attention to data, we'll learn from it, which we tend not to do very well today. Okay. Number two is we won't make the mistake of extending the time to get to scale, which is that's I call that the innovation death spiral. And we go through the learning process efficiently and quickly. And that's actually what the agile, and I just had this conversation with a client of mine. So here's another funny quick story. I spent 6 weeks in Utah skiing this winter. One of the guys, I hung out with my best friend from college that happens to be named Chris as well.
Okay.
But one of the guys I met there, he was in an analytics company, and I was telling him what I was doing, because Chris, I think we need that. So he reaches out to me after we get back, and he reaches out, and he goes, what do I do? I said, Ranjan, I'll send you my playbook. And it's my Agile Market Entry Framework, Sales Framework Playbook. I'll send this to you. All you've got to do is read it and execute it, and it will get you through this without making many of the common mistakes people do at the stage you're at. If you want me to help, I will. But the point being is, that's what Agile Market Entry does. It lays out the steps that you have to go through, the learning steps, and you and I talked about it. What's your market entry point?
Yep.
Based on that, what's your language market fit, or what's your messaging? Then developing your lead gen tactics. Then developing your sales process. Then developing the back end adoption process. But the framework lays out all the steps in that process. You have to go through the learning process. If you go through that methodically, you'll pick up the data, you'll learn the clues, you'll go back and iterate, right? You'll make mistakes because we're doing this for the first time. You'll go back and you'll do that stage over again. You'll create experiments to go through the stages, and you'll move through those stages as efficiently as you possibly can in a learning discovery process.
That's such a huge contribution because all of my students who have read Lean Startup, Steve Blank really was the first person to say, customer involvement is the core of early stage entrepreneurism. You're not really a venture, you're a customer discovery tool.
Yep.
But what you've done with Agile Market Entry is actually document very clearly what the stages are to do it, to the extent that even an amateur can follow it.
Yes.
Which is really spooky cool.
It is spooky. So Ranjan, he said to me, well, first of all, he made his whole staff read it multiple times. And now the rest of you, he goes, Chris, he goes, this all makes sense. I kind of know this stuff intuitively, but no one's laid out the framework to methodically do it.
Yeah, people just don't follow through. So you only get to a certain point. So I want to go back for a minute when we're talking about market expansion. So you go to that early innovator, that 14% you were talking about, that group that will pay the most for the application. And your experience is actually, a macroeconomist would say, well, that's too small a market. No, you're saying, no, that's the passion market. That's the market you want to go after. But when you look at one derivation beyond that, a customer that's maybe not an early innovator, but is maybe a Main Street type of buyer, how do you convert them from that early adopter to the Main Street? How do you sell them?
So that's pretty straightforward, and that's kind of, so what those are the early majority of the Dons are looking for, they won't trust, and they won't trust two things. They won't trust their own vision for the future. That's the most important thing, and they won't trust the company they're talking to.
Okay.
And on top of that, you put on top of that a startup company has no credibility in the marketplace, so they're hard to trust anyway.
Yeah, you 3 stars, you're out.
Exactly. So those people, they need evidence.
And your 14% gives you the evidence.
The 14% gives you the
they become
evidence.
referenceability, but it's beyond referenceability because it's actually a proven process.
It's a proven process. If you do that well, you create buzz in the marketplace, right? So the marketplace starts talking about this.
Got you, and it creates momentum.
And so then when the company starts marketing to those people, they've heard about it before, yes. That's what that early majority wants. You need the two things. You need to be credible, and you got to be trustworthy.
Right.
And
you got to be a false illusion.
Well, that's the credibility piece.
Yeah.
You got to deliver. You got to be able to deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and that's what you need those early innovators, early adopters to demonstrate for the rest of the market.
That makes sense.
But you start from the very beginning. Before you launch the technology, you start planning for that.
Yeah.
If you start planning for that, when you get to the chasm, it's not a chasm. You're prepared to cross it.
Yeah, because you have the tools.
You've already got the bridge. You've already started building the bridge.
The bridge is already framed.
It's already framed out and ready to go, so you're already ready to cross it.
So fascinating. Can I ask you, how do you collect your data? So if let's say Chris, you're really good at that. You've got the X factor. You have documented it, and other people can follow it. But let's say there's 5 Chris's, and they're attacking one market. How do you collect the data, and how do you share it among the 5 people that might be prosecuting it?
That's where the agile methodologies really come in.
You share information pretty kinetically?
Yes, you have to. So again, remember the most important thing here is, so a couple things have to happen. One is you don't manage those salespeople like normal salespeople.
Right.
First of all, you don't hire a normally convergent salesperson. You hire these people. I call them
convergent.
The ones that are convergent too, and they're called rebels, cowboys, and troublemakers. That's who they are, because they're always ones. There were me.
Yeah.
I would get a part of the market figured out, they'd start going, and I'd be happy, and then I'd jump to another part.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah. I got fired multiple times throughout my career because of this.
And this was the cowboys are the ones who figure it out, and then you turn it over to the traditional sales dudes to try and turn the crank.
And that's what you want. And if you get, well, first of all, you need those type of people on this team.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that's different than a lot of you have to be careful about the Cowboys, they have to be team players too.
Yeah.
That's the one characteristic that you may not find in all those Cowboys, but you need them. And there is sort of, I find they tend to be women more than guys, so the team makers in that
That's
line.
interesting.
But I think that's, well, I don't know, but there's guys that are that way
Well, women
too.
listen a lot better. Now this is probably going to get documented, but it's interesting. A lot of what you're doing is active listening.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all about listening.
You're not trying to persuade and convince.
I'm actually trying to dissuade at some points, right?
Is that right?
Well, we talked about that.
Yeah.
In the qualifying process, I try to dissuade people.
Selling them after you're selling.
I sell them because I want them to have them self-select the late majority of them because I don't want them. But so first of all, you hire the right people. Then you manage them differently. So you can't do a traditional, commission model because these people are taking much greater risk than any other sales rep.
Sure.
They're figuring out this sales model, which is the risky part. So you gotta manage that. But the bigger thing is you don't tell them how to sell.
Right.
Instead of giving them what they do, like the pricing, you give them boundaries.
Yeah.
And you say, listen, here's the boundaries to operate in. Inside those boundaries, you can do anything.
Gotcha.
But here's the rules of the game. We get together and we share across the team what works, what isn't working, what we're going to practice next, and what we're going to try next. But you guys have free reign. This is the agile methodology. This is how you manage an agile team. This is why you do the daily scrums, that type of stuff.
Okay, so you do actually have a very daily interaction.
Oh, with
like
this,
a scrum.
Again, right at this point in time, the important thing is data. So you want to send those 5 reps out,
bring
them back in, send them out, bring them back in.
Gotcha.
But you want to be sharing across that team because what Joe's doing in Florida that's working, you want Jane in California to be trying it too because you want to see if it's going to work in different markets. You also want what Jane did that didn't work. You don't want Ted in Connecticut to try that too because that already doesn't. We already know that doesn't work. So we're the learning stage, we're the discovery stage, and then the leadership of this team gathers it, starts pulling the patterns. Also points them in certain directions if what the next experiment might be or what the next critical thing might be.
Got it.
So, but the important thing is this. I've done this mostly in my career on my own. But with teams, it's a
same deal.
It's the same deal.
Yeah, you just have to collect the information.
But it's important. You got to get the right people in the team. That's number one, and most people don't know how to do that. Yeah. And then you have to figure out how to manage them differently.
Right.
Because you can't manage them like traditional salespeople.
Yeah, it sounds like it has to be boundaries and let them go.
You gotta let them go. You want them. Yeah. You want to tap into that cowboy in them.
You know what occurs to me is that the traditional tools for selling, like Salesforce, probably get in the way of this. What have you found by way of tools? Are there tools that you can help collect data?
No.
It's really narrative.
It's really narrative.
It's kind of what your insights are.
And
you gotta have somebody who's aware.
You gotta have someone who
Self-starters.
knows how to do what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So you gotta have someone that's done this a couple times. It's launched something disruptive. Because you don't really learn how to do it until you don't really know where the patterns are until you've seen them a couple times.
It's a lot different than selling dish soap, It's like the opposite.
It's antithetical.
Yeah.
I go in and tell a VP of sales he shouldn't be tracking your reps with revenue. He's going to throw me out of his office. But if you track a rep by revenue, in what we're doing, if that's what they're measured by, you'll never get to a repeatable sales process, which you'll never get to scale, which means you never get the company profitability, which means your valuation never goes up.
Gotcha. So, okay, say you've gotten traction, you've gotten to your early group, that 14%, you're winning well. You've discounted, your pricing to get in initially. How do you get your pricing finalized, settled, and what do you do with the discounts that are sitting out there? Do you allow for an early majority that's always going to have a preferential position, and you take care of them, nurture them?
You make those early guys that got you. Those were gold to you. So you make sure those guys you take care of
always. Yeah. Because you're not lifting their discounts anytime soon.
I'm never going to lift their discounts. If anything, I'm going to give them bigger ones going forward.
Okay.
Because they're the ones that stage determines whether your company's successful or not.
Yeah. Companies
will live and fail at that stage. So those people that help you, and you got to remember, you're not. These companies, these people are not customers. They're partners. If you do this well, and they're the right type of customer, they're partners with you. So now the other thing, pricing. You talk about pricing. So there is no magic in pricing when you're doing it, and you can be all over the place. Early on, the idea around pricing is you got to get deals done, and you don't want to give them away for free if you don't have to, because skin in the game is a lot more valuable data than
People don't value it if they don't pay for it.
People don't value it. Plus, you don't get any market sensitivity knowledge out of price sensitivity knowledge. But don't get me wrong, I'm all over the place on pricing, because I'm trying to figure out where the market sensitivity is, where the sensitivity was.
And do you test it?
Oh yeah, constantly.
Okay, so
every customer almost early on, right?
But it must be havoc for the guy doing sales support or the person who's got to do fulfillment. It's like, what price did you say, Chris? So tell me, how do you clean it up afterwards?
So you can figure out where early on, you can pretty quickly, in your first 10 to 20 customers, you can start figuring this out.
So you've got a price, you've got varying discounts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I make sure I just have lots of freedom. If I'm running that, I just have lots of freedom. Or I can, for give and takes.
Yeah.
If a guy's going to write a journal publication for me, I'm like, I might give him a deep discount.
Yeah. That's where you're getting a benefit in another way.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do trade-offs at that point in time, but I still want to try to get all my customers to pay if I can, because you always want to do that. But pretty early on, in the first 10 to 20 customers in a complex B2B sales, you can start figuring out where your pricing should lie early on for that early market. It'll go down over time. And as you expand markets, it'll change, but all markets do that. That's the way markets happen,
I love, the kind of techniques that you put to work in the early stage, that, you're really cute how you say, I've been fired from multiple jobs, because you're not a crank turner. But it occurs to me that what you're dealing with is a culture. And you're building a culture at the early stage in a sales environment that, kind of looks like a guerrilla kind of operation.
Oh, absolutely.
And tell me a little bit about, first, how do you find the people that are going to perform in that kind of environment? What do they look like?
Yep.
And then secondly, how do you build an overall culture that still creates some continuity? Gives you some basis of, accountability.
So the culture, you don't have to worry about the culture. If you've got someone that's in that role in a big company, these people tend to be, they're driven by different things.
Yeah.
I'm speaking from my own experience. I've worked with enough people. They're driven by doing right for their customers.
Okay.
That's one of the primary things that is in these people. They're driven. I've done this throughout my career. I put my customer in front of the company.
Gotcha.
Because first of all, that's the type of people you need to build trust with early customers, and you have no credibility coming out of the gate. So the only thing you're selling is trust, and where the trust is built between the sales rep and the company.
Oh, I get it, because they took a bet on you.
Yes.
And I'm going to pay it back with showing you I'm going to be there for you.
Yes.
Got you.
Exactly. So that's one. So I don't worry about the people with those personalities, man. They're so driven by this need to do right by their customer. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's going to serve the company. That's what you want serving the company at this early stage.
Yeah. It sounds like it's not an inexpensive asset to acquire. That's the other odd thing is, in startup, you're dealing with negative cash flow at the beginning while you're building out your market and so forth. You can't hire the very best, but what are you looking for in a promising person? An up and coming person, and do you train them? Is that the way you build your own team?
So you can do it both ways. So I've gone into big organizations. I've done consulting with big startups where they have a sales force of 20 or 30 people type thing. Yeah. That's what the big one is in a startup. And you can usually find these people. It's a small percentage. It's 10, 15%. But you can find them in those teams, and if you talk to the VP of sales, he'll tell you he'll be complaining about them.
Yeah.
He'll love them. There'll be a love-hate relationship there, right? Because oftentimes they're high delivers, but they're going off reservation.
Always off the reservation.
Always off the reservation. So I can usually find them. Then if I just go spend a day or two with them, I can pick them up because I know what I'm looking for. Plus, they're like mine. So now, I'm working with another company right now. This is a pure startup, and the founder CEO is leading all their sales.
Okay.
And I've had a couple initial conversations with her, and she's going after 5 markets. right? Can't do that.
You're right.
You know, you got
to pick one.
You got to pick one. In her case, we're actually going to pick two.
Yeah.
But here's the reason: she has one market where she probably has 80 to 90% of the data to have a repeatable sales process.
Okay, so she's already mature there.
She's I wouldn't say mature, but mature for the early, for that early stage of the
So
development.
now she can start attacking number two.
So, well, she's going to tackle one first, and we've got to get to the point where she has a repeatable process. Bring in a sales rep that has experience selling. You can hand that repeatable process to them.
Over to that.
And a decent sales rep, gross state sales rep, should be able to execute that.
Got you.
And that doesn't, it doesn't be a highly experienced person.
So you're actually always kind of substituting out people. You got your early cowboys, and then you end up turning them into the next market.
Well, that's what
Because otherwise you're going to lose them anyways.
And you're going to lose them anyway. Exactly. So now what we're doing with her is once she gets that person, two things she has to do. One is get that sales rep in place, and then she has to find an outside marketing firm that can scale up. They can scale up the lead gen tactics, and she has a pretty good idea what those are. But she has to. Once she has those two things in place, then she can go attack the second market. Which, interestingly, the small market. The reason we're picking the first market is, first of all, she has enough data, enough customers there to get to the repeatable sales process quickly. One. Number two is their sales cycles are really short. And I say short, a month to 3 months. Mm-hmm. But the revenue is only about $50,000 per customer. Okay, not bad for a startup, but
you got to get it.
But you have to get the huge scale to really hit the second market is much larger health systems.
Yeah.
And she's going to start the same way. She's going to get one clinic, but the upside on them is probably $500,000 to $1 million per customer. Yeah. So and you start seeing that how you enter markets through that entry point, and then start growing and scaling up. It's kind of land and expand, right?
Yeah, and actually your close rate at the early stage is very, very high, isn't it? You close more than you would think, but you're getting up some of the promise of that profitability at the beginning because you're not really concerned about revenue, you're concerned about fulfillment or closing. And if you get narrow, the narrower you get, the less it costs to penetrate the market, and the easier it is to close the market, and the higher close rate you have. Wow. Because you've kind of tweaked your customers so you can go through that sales process efficiently. Okay. I'm going to take a little risk now.
Okay.
So I'm going to paint a scenario.
You know what?
I'm going to give you a scenario.
Oh, okay.
I want you to sell me. I am a biotech company, and you represent a scientific founder that started a startup that does CRISPR, gene editing. And I'm really interested in a therapeutic that would use genetics ultimately to solve muscular dystrophy, maybe Duchenne's, maybe a subset of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. You have a CRISPR technique that you believe will be effective when combined with my therapy to ultimately solve for that therapy.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
It's somewhat.
It's complex. It's certainly complex. Let's have this meeting now. I'm the economic buyer. I'm prepared to take on other technologies. I want to onboard other technologies because what I have is a one-trick pony and it's not quite working. And there's clinical data that suggests to me I might fail.
Yeah.
And I need to have a plan B. So I'm already positioned to get it close, but pitch me.
So Ted, you accepted. I reached out to you a couple weeks ago, and you responded. Why'd you respond? Why am I in here sitting with you today?
Yeah, well, we have this therapeutic that's already in early human trials, and it's turning out that the results aren't looking good, and there's a chance that we might not be able to get our approval. And we've got a lot betting on this thing. And I've heard a lot about this CRISPR technology, and I'm kind of interested in it, but it's so cutting edge. And my CEO doesn't like to innovate. He likes proven technologies, but I'm curious.
Okay.
What do you got?
And can you tell me what you're curious about?
Yeah, well, so, fundamentally what we're doing is biologics, and you're doing gene editing.
Yes.
It's a totally different kind of market.
Completely.
How can I adopt your cutting edge technology as a way to start a new process to solve the same, indication?
Okay, and you said that you're running into some challenges with your existing development program.
It turns out that the molecule I'm working with is not performing, and we thought it was going to be a gangbuster. There was a lot of attention on us, but if we don't get approval, it could call the company. I'm in trouble. We're kind of in trouble just between us. Please don't share that.
Yeah, no, I would never share that. I appreciate your generosity and from what you've heard about CRISPR, I'm just kind of, and then this was intriguing because I was a little surprised that you gave me a call, given the state you guys are going into phase 2 now. I was a little surprised to hear, but usually we get involved much earlier in the development process.
Yeah.
What do you think I might be able to do for you?
Well,
or best case scenario, what could I do for you?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but what I'm thinking is I'd like to have a secondary story that if we do get a rejection from FDA, that I got something else on the pipeline so that our stock doesn't tank.
Yeah.
And my CEO is all over me for this. If I don't get something moving that has a promise, okay, this one didn't work, but we got something right behind it, then I'm in a much better shop.
Okay. So that's how I would lead into this.
Okay, all right. So I noticed that it was just a series of questions, and you're trying to smoke me out. Now,
no, actually, here's what I'm trying to do. When you're doing something disruptive, it's very specific, and I've learned this from years and years. Customer discovery is the best way to sell when you're doing something disruptive. Mm-hmm. You don't go into people. When people are looking for something disruptive, they're not looking for features and benefits.
Right.
They're looking to solve very specific problems that they have. And this is where traditional marketing doesn't work in these markets. The only thing you talk to is the problem.
Okay.
Because that's the only thing that matters over there.
That's exactly right. And what people are focused on is that problem vortex. How you find that ultimate solution. Okay.
People focus on the two things. One is they focus on their product.
Yeah.
And then telling you how great it is.
Yeah.
That what they think, what they've been told by marketing are the benefits.
Right.
An early innovator, early adopter that you're looking for doesn't care about those two things. He cares
They're
about.
They're going to listen to it.
They're not going to listen. All they care about, and this is what disrupt. And this is how you disrupt markets. You go in and find. So I like to think of it's, the old Pillsbury Doughboy.
Yeah.
And you poke them and you go, oh, exactly. Well, think of it more as your general practitioner. You go in with the general abdominal pain, starts poking around, and when I'm going in and selling, I'm trying to find out where do I poke that's going to have that patient jump off the table. That's the only thing the market responds to. That's what you're looking for.
Now I want to continue this scenario then, because I want you now to unsell me. I want you to demonstrate that. Okay, Chris, dude, I gotta get something going, and if you can put together an array for me to do a CRISPR demonstration, even if it's early, I'd really like to get something going, and I don't know what it's going to take to get there. We got a small budget, but I don't know what I can promise you. But
I have a little bit of a challenge though. As you know, I'm a startup company.
Yeah.
I can only do this with about 5 customers here over the next 6 to 12 months.
5 customers.
So here's why I can only do it with 5. Number one is we're doing this for the first time. We know our technology works. We've done it with Harvard. That's probably where I'd send you some of the information about what we're doing there. Okay. So we're doing it then. But that's the first time we've done it. And that's the first time we took it out of our lab and put it in someone else's lab. And we're doing it then, and it works. And we know that. But there's still things we don't know about scale. Some of the scale-up stuff of it right now that we're starting to figure out. And I'm not looking, honestly, Ted, I'm not looking for customers right now. I'm looking for partners. That want to go through that with me, and if you're not ready for that, we should probably.
I get it. I think I think we could be that partner because actually a lot of my discovery people are out on the beach right now, anyways, and we could actually reapply them into the CRISPR technology and take them off of the biologics and have them kind of work with you. So, all right, let's talk.
Okay.
Sounds like you're gonna need a little bit more budget. You're the man, dude.
But that's exactly how I would do it. I literally tried to talk them out. And And typically I do is I just tell them the truth.
Okay.
Whenever I'm selling, when all else fails, I fall back on telling the truth.
Well, Chris, I've enjoyed this session. You're a giant in this area. If you don't mind sharing a little bit more about your agile market entry strategy with the students, I'd be grateful.
Sure.
And I look forward to you being involved with our program going forward.
Happy to, Ted, anyway. And by the way, the framework, the playbook, that's a freebie.
That's awesome.
That's a 35-page, it lays out the whole thing from beginning to end, everything I've learned over the last 40 years, and I give it away.
Wow, that's amazing. That's very generous. And I want to thank you for that, Chris.
Yeah.
You've moved a real mountain in helping entrepreneurs try to figure out this early entry opportunity. So
cool.
All right. Thanks again.
Yeah.